In the year King Uzziah died, the prophet Isaiah stood within the sacred walls of the Jerusalem temple. What happened next would shatter everything humanity thought it knew about the celestial realm. The walls dissolved. The veil between worlds tore open, and Isaiah found himself staring directly into the throne room of the Almighty. But it was not God alone who captured his attention. Hovering above the throne, creatures of such terrifying majesty moved through the smoke-filled air that Isaiah's mind struggled to comprehend what his eyes beheld. They were beings of fire and shadow, serpentine and sublime, creatures with 6 magnificent wings that beat the air with the rhythm of eternity itself. With 2 wings they concealed their faces, as if even they could not bear to look directly upon the divine glory. With 2 they covered their feet, hiding what should not be revealed. And with 2 they flew, moving through dimensions of reality that mortal flesh was never meant to witness. These were the seraphim, the burning ones, the forgotten sentinels who stood at the very threshold of heaven's throne. And their voices shook the foundations of the temple as they called to one another in a thunderous chorus that would echo through millennia. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Isaiah collapsed. Terror seized his heart as he realized he was witnessing something forbidden, something so sacred that his very existence as an impure mortal in this space meant certain death. But one of these fiery beings descended, carrying in its hand a coal taken directly from the altar with tongs, burning with supernatural fire. The creature touched Isaiah's lips with the searing ember, and in that moment of agonizing purification, the prophet's sins were burned away. This encounter, recorded in the 6th chapter of Isaiah's prophecy, represents the only detailed description of seraphim in the entire Hebrew Bible. It is a singular glimpse into a category of celestial beings so exalted, so terrible, that the biblical authors seem almost hesitant to speak of them. While cherubim appear throughout Scripture and archangels like Michael and Gabriel become household names in religious tradition, the seraphim remain shrouded in mystery, their true nature debated by scholars for thousands of years. But who were these creatures really? Were they merely angels, divine messengers carrying out the will of heaven? Or were they something far more ancient, far more terrible? The evidence scattered throughout ancient texts suggests a truth that has been largely forgotten, a reality that challenges our sanitized modern understanding of the spiritual realm. The seraphim were not simply worshiping angels surrounding God's throne. They were cosmic enforcers, agents of divine justice who possessed the authority to execute judgment, not merely upon humanity, but upon the gods themselves. To understand the seraphim, we must first understand their name. The Hebrew word seraph comes from a root that means to burn, to kindle, or even to destroy. When pluralized to seraphim, it literally means the burning ones or the fiery ones. This is not poetic metaphor. This is a description of their fundamental nature. But here is where the mystery deepens and the sanitized image of angelic beings begins to crack. The word seraph appears 7 times in the Hebrew Bible. Only twice, in Isaiah chapter 6, does it clearly refer to the celestial beings we recognize as seraphim. In every other instance, the word refers to venomous serpents, specifically the deadly creatures that God unleashed upon the Israelites in the wilderness as divine punishment. Numbers chapter 21 records this terrifying episode. The Israelites had grown contemptuous in the desert, complaining against God and Moses, speaking against the manna that sustained them. The response was swift and merciless. The Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many of the people of Israel died. The Hebrew text uses the exact same word, hanashashim haseraphim, the fiery serpents, the seraphim. Think about that for a moment. The same word used to describe the holy beings attending God's throne is the identical term used for venomous snakes that brought death and judgment upon rebellious humanity. This is not coincidental. This is not a case of simple linguistic overlap. The ancient Hebrews understood something profound about the nature of these creatures that has been obscured by centuries of religious domestication. When the dying Israelites cried out for deliverance, God instructed Moses to make a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole. Anyone who had been bitten could look upon this elevated serpent and live. The Hebrew text calls this bronze figure a seraph. A seraph. It was serpentine, it was elevated, and it brought both judgment and salvation, death and life held in terrible tension. But the connection goes even deeper. Isaiah himself, in later prophecies, mentions flying fiery serpents. In Isaiah chapter 14, verse 29, he warns the Philistines not to rejoice, for from the serpent's root will come forth a viper, and its offspring will be a flying fiery serpent. The same phrase appears again in Isaiah 30, verse 6, where the prophet describes the beasts of the Negev, the land of trouble and anguish, from where come the lioness and the lion, the viper and the flying fiery serpent. Flying, fiery, serpents. The connection becomes impossible to ignore. The seraphim were not the chubby-cheeked cherubs of Renaissance paintings. They were serpentine beings of fire, creatures that combined the terror of venomous reptiles with the glory of heavenly messengers. This understanding finds stunning confirmation in ancient Near Eastern archaeology. Excavations throughout Israel and the surrounding regions have uncovered hundreds of seal impressions from the 8th and 7th centuries before Christ, Isaiah's own era. These seals frequently depict winged serpents, often with multiple sets of wings, exactly matching the description of the 6-winged seraphim. Some show 4 wings, others 6. Many display serpentine bodies with human characteristics, hands that could grasp objects, faces that could speak. The imagery traces back even further, to Egypt. The uraeus, the rearing cobra worn on the foreheads of pharaohs, was no mere decorative symbol. It represented the goddess Wadjet, the divine protector whose fiery serpent form would spit poison at enemies of the king. Egyptian iconography frequently depicted uraei with wings, transforming them from earthbound snakes into celestial guardians. When the Israelites left Egypt and entered Canaan, they encountered these images everywhere. The symbolism was borrowed, transformed, and integrated into Israelite understanding of the divine realm. The seraphim, therefore, were beings that bridged multiple symbolic worlds. They were serpents, connecting them to both wisdom and danger, to the ancient chaos waters, and to the cunning of Eden's tempter. They were fiery, marking them as agents of divine wrath and purification. They were winged, granting them access to the heavens and the ability to move between realms. And they possessed hands and voices, making them capable of action and speech, able to grasp burning coals and proclaim the holiness of God. This complex symbolism reveals something crucial. The seraphim were not simple creations designed merely to sing praise. They were beings of judgment and mercy, of punishment and purification, creatures whose very form testified to their dual nature as bringers of both death and deliverance. The connection between seraphim and judgment becomes even more explicit when we examine their role in Scripture. The wilderness serpents were not random creatures that happened to inhabit the desert. They were specifically sent by God as instruments of divine wrath. The text states this clearly. The Lord sent the fiery serpents among the people. This was not natural disaster. This was targeted, purposeful judgment. The nature of their bite is significant. The venom was described as producing a burning sensation, hence the name fiery serpents. But scholars note that this burning may have had a dual meaning. It could refer to the physical inflammation caused by the poison, the way venom causes tissue to swell and burn. But it could also point to something more metaphysical, a spiritual burning, a judgment that transcended mere physical death. The parallelism with Isaiah's encounter is striking. When the seraph touched Isaiah's lips with the burning coal, it brought purification through fire. The prophet himself explains the meaning. "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." The fire did not destroy him. Instead, it burned away his impurity, making him fit to stand in the presence of the holy. But this purifying fire had a darker counterpart. The wilderness serpents brought burning death to those who rejected God's provision. Their bite was judgment without mercy for the rebellious. Only by looking to the elevated bronze serpent, by literally lifting one's eyes to acknowledge the very thing that brought death, could one find life. This creates a profound theological picture. The seraphim, whether appearing as celestial beings around the throne or as judgment-bringing serpents in the wilderness, functioned as agents of divine holiness. Holiness, in the ancient Hebrew understanding, was not merely moral purity. It was a dangerous, consuming reality like fire itself. To approach the holy without proper preparation meant death, but to be touched by holy fire through the proper mediator meant cleansing and transformation. The bronze serpent narrative carries another layer of meaning that connects directly to the seraphim's role. When Moses elevated the bronze serpent on a pole, he created an image that would resonate through biblical theology for centuries. Jesus himself would later invoke this image, telling Nicodemus that just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. The serpent on the pole became a symbol of judgment and salvation intertwined. It represented the very thing that brought death, but when looked upon in faith, it brought healing. This paradox is central to understanding the seraphim. They embodied both the terror of divine judgment and the hope of divine mercy. They could bring death to the rebellious and purification to the humble. Some scholars have noted that in ancient Near Eastern thought, serpents were frequently associated with divine authority and judgment. In Egyptian mythology, the uraeus was not merely decorative. It actively protected the pharaoh by spitting fire at his enemies. The serpent was the enforcer of divine order, the destroyer of chaos. When pharaohs died and journeyed to the afterlife, winged serpents were believed to carry them upward to heaven, serving as both guardians and guides. This dual role of destruction and deliverance appears repeatedly in the biblical portrayal of the seraphim and their serpentine counterparts. They are not neutral observers. They are active participants in the cosmic drama of judgment and redemption. They stand at the boundaries, guarding the threshold between the holy and the profane, between life and death, between the divine and the mortal. Isaiah's vision emphasizes this guardian role. The seraphim hover above the throne, surrounding God's glory, creating a barrier of holy fire that no impure thing can cross. When Isaiah realizes he has seen the King, the Lord of hosts, his first thought is of his own impending doom. He cries out that he is a man of unclean lips dwelling among a people of unclean lips, and his eyes have seen the King. The implication is clear. He expects to die, for no one can see God and live. But the seraph intervenes. One of these terrible beings becomes the agent of mercy, bridging the gap between human impurity and divine holiness. The burning coal, taken from the altar where sacrifices were offered, represents accepted atonement. The seraph applies this atonement to Isaiah, touching his mouth with fire, burning away his sin. In that moment, the prophet is transformed from condemned to commissioned, from doomed to delivered. This is the power of the seraphim. They do not merely witness judgment, they execute it. They do not simply observe mercy, they deliver it. They are the enforcers of divine holiness, the beings who maintain the order of heaven itself. To fully understand the seraphim's role in judging the gods themselves, we must step back and examine a concept that pervades ancient Near Eastern religion, but has been largely obscured in modern biblical interpretation: the divine council. In the ancient world, the heavens were not conceived as a sterile void or an abstract spiritual realm. They were understood as a royal court, a cosmic government, where a supreme deity presided over an assembly of lesser divine beings. This was not unique to Israel. Every major civilization in the ancient Near East, from Egypt to Mesopotamia to Canaan, shared this basic cosmological framework. In Egypt, The god Ra presided over assemblies of deities who would gather to make decisions about the fate of humanity and the ordering of the cosmos. In Mesopotamia, Anu, the sky god, led councils where the gods would debate courses of action, vote on propositions, and bind themselves by oath to execute collective decisions. The Babylonian epic Enuma Elish describes how Marduk rose to leadership of the divine council by volunteering to defeat the chaos monster Tiamat, but only after demanding that the assembled gods convene an official council meeting to formally grant him this authority. At Ugarit, in what is now Syria, texts describe El, the father of the gods, presiding over a divine assembly with clear hierarchical structure. At the top were the parent gods, El and Asherah. Below them ranked the great gods like Baal, the storm deity, and Anat, the warrior goddess. Further down the hierarchy were specialized craftsman gods and messenger deities. This cosmic bureaucracy mirrored earthly kingdoms, where kings ruled with the council of advisors, military commanders, and servants of varying rank. The Hebrew Bible, far from rejecting this framework entirely, transforms it. Rather than a pantheon of rival deities vying for power, the scriptures present Yahweh as the supreme God presiding over an assembly of lesser spiritual beings, often called sons of God or the host of heaven. These beings were real, not merely symbolic. They possessed genuine power and authority, but they were absolutely subordinate to Yahweh, who alone held ultimate sovereignty. Psalm 82 provides perhaps the most explicit description of this divine council in the Bible. The psalm begins with a stark declaration. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. The scene is a courtroom. God stands to pronounce sentence, but who are the defendants? The psalm continues. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. These are commands issued to rulers, to those with authority over nations and peoples. The accused gods have failed in their responsibilities. They have allowed injustice to flourish. They have shown favoritism to the wicked. They have neglected the vulnerable. And now they face judgment for their failures. This judgment connects directly to an earlier text in Deuteronomy chapter 32. When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the children of man, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Here we learn that when God scattered humanity after the Tower of Babel incident, he assigned different spiritual beings, sons of God, to oversee the various nations. Each nation received a divine overseer, a member of the cosmic council tasked with maintaining justice and order. But Israel was different. Israel was kept as Yahweh's own inheritance, his direct possession, not delegated to any lesser being. And as time passed, the other nations' divine rulers, these sons of God, became corrupt. They began accepting worship meant only for the Most High. They led their nations into wickedness rather than righteousness. They failed catastrophically in their assigned duties. Psalm 82, then, is the record of their judgment. God convenes the council not to consult but to condemn. These divine beings, these gods, these members of heaven's court, are found guilty and sentenced to mortality. They will die. They will fall. Their authority is revoked. Where do the seraphim fit into this cosmic drama? The answer lies in their position and function. In Isaiah's vision, they surround the throne of God, the closest beings to the divine presence. They are the inner circle, the guards at the very gates of heaven. When Isaiah finds himself suddenly in this space, trembling and doomed, one of the seraphim acts as gatekeeper, determining who may stand in God's presence and who must be purified or cast out. The Book of Enoch, a Jewish text from the 2nd century before Christ that was widely read in early Christianity, confirms this role. It places seraphim and cherubim as the beings standing nearest to God's throne, the highest-ranking members of the celestial hierarchy. They are described as having authority over paradise itself, as overseeing the cherubim, as having access to the most intimate spaces of heaven. Later Jewish mystical traditions elaborate on this further. In the third book of Enoch, a text that records visions attributed to Rabbi Ishmael, the seraphim are described as having 4 faces and corresponding to the 4 winds of the world. Each seraph has 16 faces, each face like the rising sun in its brilliance. Most significantly, the text states that the seraphim burn the tablets of Satan. According to this tradition, every day Satan sits with other fallen princes to record the sins of Israel on tablets. They present these tablets to the seraphim, demanding that God destroy his people based on their transgressions. But the seraphim, knowing that God does not desire Israel's destruction, take the tablets and burn them in holy fire. They function as defenders of God's people, intercessors who consume accusations before they can reach the throne. This portrayal reveals the seraphim as more than worshiping angels. They are judicial officers, beings with authority to accept or reject charges, to execute or withhold judgment. They stand between accuser and accused, between the demands of divine justice and the possibility of divine mercy. They are, in effect, the supreme court of heaven, the final arbiters before the throne itself. 1 Kings chapter 22 provides another glimpse of the divine council in action. The prophet Micaiah describes a vision where he saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing around him on his right and on his left. God asks who will entice King Ahab to go into battle where he will be killed. Various spirits make suggestions until one volunteers for the task. God approves the plan, and the spirit goes forth to be a lying spirit in the mouths of Ahab's prophets. This is the divine council functioning as a decision-making body. God does not act unilaterally. He consults with the assembly. He considers options. He assigns tasks. The hosts of heaven, the members of the council, participate in governance of the cosmos. And the seraphim, as the highest-ranking members present, would have had the most influential voices in such deliberations. But what happens when members of this council rebel? What occurs when gods assigned to rule nations become tyrants instead of servants? Psalm 82 gives us the answer. They are judged, stripped of their immortality, sentenced to die. And the seraphim, as guardians of divine holiness and executors of divine justice, would have been the ones to carry out this sentence. The description of the seraphim in Isaiah chapter 6 emphasizes their otherworldly nature through several key details. Each seraph had 6 wings. This is not a number chosen randomly. In ancient numerology, 6 represented imperfection, falling short of the perfect 7. But for the seraphim, 6 wings represented complete coverage and complete mobility within their assigned realm. 2 wings for flight, 2 for covering the face, 2 for covering the feet. The covered face is particularly significant. Even these exalted beings, creatures who dwelt in God's immediate presence, could not look directly upon the full glory of the divine. They veiled their faces, acknowledging their own limitations, their own creatureliness, their own subordination to the infinite holiness before them. This stands in stark contrast to many modern depictions of angels as casual visitors to the divine throne, comfortable and familiar in God's presence. The seraphim knew better. They understood the danger, the overwhelming power, the consuming fire of true holiness. The covered feet has been interpreted various ways by scholars. Some suggest that feet was a euphemism for the lower body or genitalia, parts considered shameful or private even for celestial beings. Others see it as simply indicating modesty, a covering of the entirety of their being except what was necessary for their function. Either way, the gesture speaks to reverence, to a recognition that even in heaven, in the throne room itself, there are boundaries and proprieties that must be observed. The wings used for flying allowed the seraphim their distinctive mobility. They hovered above the throne, constantly in motion, eternally vigilant. Their flight was not mere transportation, but a kind of dance, a perpetual circling of the divine presence, maintaining their watchful positions at all times. But it was their voices that most captured Isaiah's attention. They called to one another, antiphonally, creating a chorus of declaration that literally shook the physical structure of the temple. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. This threefold repetition, the trisagion, became one of the most important liturgical elements in both Judaism and Christianity. The triple holy emphasizes absolute, complete, superlative holiness. Not merely holy, but holy beyond all conception of holiness. It is holiness cubed, holiness elevated to its ultimate degree. And this holiness is attributed specifically to the Lord of hosts, to Yahweh as the commander of armies, the ruler of the divine council, the supreme authority over all powers in heaven and earth. The second part of their cry is equally significant. The whole earth is full of his glory. The seraphim declare that divine glory is not contained only in the temple, not restricted to the throne room, but fills all of creation. Every part of physical reality reflects the glory of God. This cosmic claim establishes that there is nowhere beyond divine authority, no realm where God's sovereignty does not extend. When the seraphim spoke, the doorposts and thresholds shook. In ancient Near Eastern understanding, earthquakes accompanied divine presence. When God appeared on Mount Sinai to give the law, the mountain quaked and burned with fire. When God manifests his presence, physical reality itself responds, trembling at the weight of divine glory. The shaking temple indicated that the boundary between heaven and earth had grown dangerously thin, that Isaiah stood in a liminal space where the material and spiritual worlds overlapped. The smoke that filled the temple carried multiple layers of meaning. Smoke was associated with sacrifice, with the burning of offerings on the altar. It represented prayers rising to heaven. But smoke also obscured vision, creating mystery, reminding observers that even in moments of revelation, much remains hidden, beyond mortal comprehension. And smoke, like fire, could be dangerous, suffocating those who ventured too close to its source. In this atmosphere of overwhelming holiness, Isaiah's immediate response was to confess his unworthiness. He did not feel blessed or privileged. He felt doomed. His first words were, "Woe is me." Not praise, but lament. He recognized that his presence in this space meant death. He was unclean, his lips defiled by sin and the sin of his people, and he had seen the King, the Lord of hosts. There could be only one outcome, his destruction. But then one of the seraphim flew to him. The being moved with purpose, with urgency. As if Isaiah's time was running out, the seraph had taken a live coal from the altar with tongs. Even these holy beings needed tools to handle the burning coal, suggesting the intensity of its heat, the dangerous power it contained. The coal came from the altar, the place of sacrifice, the location where atonement was made. When the seraph touched Isaiah's mouth with the coal, the prophet should have been destroyed. His lips should have burned away. But instead, the opposite occurred. The seraph declared that his guilt was taken away, his sin atoned for. The burning coal, rather than consuming him, purified him. The same fire that should have meant judgment became the instrument of mercy. This intervention reveals another crucial aspect of the seraphim's role. They were not merely witnesses to divine human interaction. They were active participants. They could extend mercy or withhold it. They could purify or condemn. They had authority to act on behalf of God, to bridge the gap between human sin and divine holiness, to make what was impossible possible. The coal's touch to Isaiah's lips was particularly meaningful. Lips represented speech, the words we utter, the way we represent ourselves to the world and to God. Isaiah had confessed that he was a man of unclean lips. The seraph addressed that specific uncleanness, purifying the very thing Isaiah had identified as defiled. This precision demonstrates that the seraphim's actions were not random or symbolic gestures, but targeted, purposeful interventions addressing specific human needs. After his purification, Isaiah was able to participate in the divine council. He heard God's voice asking, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" The plural, "for us," indicates the council context. God was consulting with the assembly, seeking a volunteer for a mission. And Isaiah, now purified, now fit to stand in this space, could respond, "Here I am. Send me." This entire sequence reveals the seraphim as gatekeepers and purifiers, as beings who control access to God's presence and who can transform the unworthy into vessels suitable for divine service. Without the seraph's intervention, Isaiah would have died in that throne room. With it, he became one of history's greatest prophets, a voice who would shape Israel's understanding of God for centuries to come. Given the seraphim's crucial role in this pivotal prophetic vision, it seems remarkable that they appear so rarely in Scripture. Isaiah chapter 6 is the only place where they are explicitly named and described as celestial beings in the Hebrew Bible. They are not mentioned in Genesis at creation. They do not appear in the Exodus narratives. They are absent from the detailed descriptions of the tabernacle and its angelic imagery. Even in the visions of Ezekiel and Daniel, which include elaborate descriptions of heavenly beings, the seraphim are not explicitly identified. This absence is puzzling and has led to much scholarly speculation. Some argue that the seraphim and cherubim are actually the same beings viewed from different perspectives or in different roles. The living creatures in Ezekiel's vision and in Revelation chapter 4 share some characteristics with Isaiah's seraphim: the 6 wings, the constant worship, the position around the throne. But the differences are also significant. Ezekiel's creatures have 4 wings and 4 faces, different from the 6-winged seraphim. The identification remains uncertain. Others suggest that seraphim represent such an exalted category of being that human language struggles to capture their nature. Perhaps biblical authors hesitated to speak of them frequently, because to do so would be to approach dangerous knowledge, to reveal too much of heaven's inner workings. The seraphim stood at the very edge of what mortals were permitted to know about the divine realm. To speak more of them might be to transgress boundaries that should not be crossed. The serpentine connections add another layer to the mystery. As Christianity developed and spread through the Greco-Roman world, the serpent became increasingly associated with evil, with Satan, with temptation and fall. The serpent in Eden, the dragon of Revelation, the ancient serpent who deceives the whole world, these images dominated Christian imagination. In such a context, how could holy angels, the highest beings around God's throne, be described as serpentine? The cognitive dissonance was too great, so the serpent imagery was quietly suppressed or spiritualized away. Medieval and Renaissance artists depicted seraphim as beautiful humanoid figures with wings, often shown as heads with wings and no bodies at all. The serpentine aspects were forgotten or deliberately obscured. The dangerous, terrifying dimension of these beings was domesticated into something safer, more palatable, less threatening to popular piety. This domestication did a profound disservice to the biblical text. It stripped the seraphim of their power, their terror, their ambiguous nature as beings of both judgment and mercy. It transformed cosmic enforcers into mere worshiping angels, creatures whose only function was to sing praise. The seraphim became decorative elements in religious art rather than fearsome guardians of divine holiness. But the ancient connections remained, buried in the text, waiting to be rediscovered. Jewish mystical traditions preserved some of the original understanding. The Kabbalistic texts maintain that seraphim were beings of fire, creatures associated with the divine attribute of Gevurah, which represents power, judgment, and severity. They were not soft or gentle, but fierce, passionate, consuming in their devotion to holiness. The Book of Enoch, though not included in most biblical canons, was widely read in the early church and influenced Christian theology significantly. The New Testament letter of Jude explicitly quotes from Enoch, treating it as authoritative. Early church fathers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian referenced Enoch in their writings. The book's descriptions of seraphim as members of the highest heavenly ranks, as beings involved in cosmic judgment, as creatures who burn accusations and defend the righteous. All of this shaped early Christian angelology. But as Christianity moved further from its Jewish roots and became increasingly Hellenized, Enoch's influence waned. The book was gradually excluded from most biblical canons, relegated to the status of interesting but non-authoritative literature. With its exclusion, much of the fuller picture of the seraphim was lost to mainstream Christian tradition. The recovery of ancient Near Eastern texts in the 19th and 20th centuries provided new context for understanding biblical descriptions of celestial beings. The discovery of the Ugaritic texts, in particular, revealed how widespread the divine council concept was in the ancient world. Suddenly, passages like Psalm 82 made sense in their original context. The gods being judged were not metaphors for human rulers, but genuine spiritual beings, members of the divine assembly who had failed in their responsibilities. This scholarship allowed for a renaissance in biblical angelology, a return to understanding celestial beings as the ancient authors described them rather than through the lens of later tradition. The seraphim could once again be seen as they were originally portrayed, as serpentine beings of fire, as enforcers of divine justice, as members of heaven's supreme court, as creatures who possessed the authority to judge and condemn even those called gods. The concept that angels, or any celestial beings, could judge God seems to violate everything we think we know about divine hierarchy. Surely the order runs from God at the top, then various ranks of spiritual beings, then humanity at the bottom. How could beings on a lower tier judge those on a higher tier? But this misunderstands the nature of the judgment described in Psalm 82 and related texts. The judgment is not the seraphim's own verdict, but God's judgment being executed through his appointed agents. The seraphim do not possess independent authority to condemn. They possess delegated authority to enforce the verdicts of the supreme judge. This is similar to how earthly courts function. Bailiffs and officers of the court may have less authority than judges, but they carry out the court's decisions. They can arrest those in contempt of court, even those with high social status. They execute the warrants issued by judicial authority. Their power derives not from themselves, but from the court they serve. The seraphim function similarly in the divine realm. They are God's officers, his enforcers, the beings who execute his judgments. When God pronounces sentence on the corrupt Elohim of the nations, declaring that they will die like mortals, it falls to the seraphim and other members of the loyal heavenly host to carry out this sentence. This explains why the seraphim are described as burning ones. They are instruments of purifying judgment. They burn away impurity. They consume the wicked. They reduce corrupt divine beings to mortality, stripping away their immortal nature, subjecting them to death and decay. The fire they represent is the fire of divine justice, unstoppable, inexorable, consuming all that is not holy. The rebellion of divine beings and their subsequent judgment is a recurring theme in biblical and extra-biblical literature. Genesis chapter 6 describes the sons of God taking human wives and producing the Nephilim, giant offspring who filled the earth with violence. This violation of cosmic boundaries precipitated the flood judgment,